In conclusion, there are many challenges that libraries face, especially as it relates to cataloging and user behavior. For the foreseeable future, the staffing of music cataloging units will remain stagnant or might even decline, while the number of resources needing processing and cataloging, both purchased and donated, continues to rise. Potential users of library data are increasingly avoiding libraries and are using search engines on the web to fulfill their information needs. To deal with this in the long term, and in order to make our resources more integrated with the web, the community should help continue the development of the infrastructure needed for having our data live on the semantic web. Once this infrastructure is fully developed, it will lead to resources being processed more quickly, which will allow for time to more fully describe objects of intellectual inquiry, and to make available on the semantic web unique collections previously hidden from view. Getting to this future will take a lot of work. There will be some questioning and some setbacks, but I believe that the consequences of staying with the status quo are so dire, and the potential benefits to us of investing in the semantic web and related enterprises are so great, that the cataloging community will take the necessary steps to move into this future. Libraries were once at the forefront of developing new methods and new technologies for accessing information. For a while now, it appears we have been content to let others take the lead. I say it is time to reclaim that mantle of leadership. And that's it.
So thank you to Ray, Dana, and Damian. I should also mention a word of thanks to Jared Cowan, who was the chair of our technical services committee. He has moved on to California, so he was not able to make it today. He's not here later. So, do we have any questions?
Yes. I have a question that's probably for Ray. So I'm Suzanne, and I'm glad to see female being added to. And I'm wondering, did you consider race? It's a loaded question, I know, and we're getting more and more multi-ethnic people. But as by way of an example, we were trying to identify works by African American composers, and even New Grove Dictionary of Jazz doesn't identify race of performers. And of course, it had huge implications, say, in the 40s, if you were in the South, how you were treated as a white performer versus a black performer. So, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I don't know. It's certainly something that crossed my mind as I was preparing this too. Obviously, nationality is in there as places associated with someone, but race is not. And I don't know if that was battered around in the development budget or not.
Well, I know just adding gender, but I don't mean to. It caused a lot of discussion because it was like, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about sex? Are we talking about because gender is a norm, a social norm. So, how do we get around this? Somebody who's sexually female but identifies themselves as male. Somebody who doesn't want to identify themselves as male or female. So it was hard enough to get gender in there. So race is going to be would be
It's
super
really
difficult.
complex. I hear the same thing, people trying to identify themselves with another race.
I think the genre people are working on trying to identify like ethnicity as a property. So instead of being where Ray showed it in the authority record like that, maybe it'll be more in the subject kind of realm. Because I know they are trying to identify something discrete so that you can look up, music by African American composers or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you see the, on the object level of RDF, do you see the idea of having a literal or URI kind of thing becoming almost the literal being taken out of the standardization? Because surely the URI, to keep the semantic elements going will become better from a standardization point of view, just to have that rather than the literal pieces.
Yes, the idea is that you would want to, you want as little as possible to not use literal.
Right.
Literals would probably only be used for identifying manifestations.
Okay.
But beyond that, you would want to either create a vocabulary or create a vocabulary for an object so that a URI can always be used. And this has been sort of done in the music community. Not in the music community, but in the wider subject community. So like library congress subject headings are now in SCOS. So they're semantic web friendly. And then all the RDA vocabularies. As much as possible, use nothing but URIs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyone else?
Yes.
I'm pretty new to semantic web, so I just wanted to ask, like, is there some sort of body that's kind of maintaining the URIs, or kind of like a Library of Congress name authority? Like, are they making sure that there's no
There are, the specification for the semantic web comes from the W3C.
Okay.
So you can go and look at that. They don't register URIs. That's one of in the box that I showed earlier. There was one that wasn't highlighted. It's called trust. And one of the things that we have to overcome with the semantic web is how much trust can we put into a particular statement, because there's no mechanism that says this statement is true. We're just making an assertion. So they're working on that. So it would help us. So if we know that this URI or this triple comes from this source, that we would tend to trust it more. Yeah.
Can I follow up on that? It's great to have information contributed by publishers, but what's to prevent them from taking it away later?
That is another thing to consider. I don't have a good answer for it. There's nothing to say that there's nothing to take it away, but there's so much. There could be. I'll have to get back to you on
As I've just seen on publisher websites, their emphasis is on what's current information and not historic information.
Well, we could do, there are semantic web harvesters out there that do harvest RDF triples. So if they're probably using something like microformats that's not full-blown RDF, but maybe a trawler out there could just pull out the triples and then put it into a triple store, someplace where it won't go away. That could be something libraries could be invested in.
I have a question for Dana.
Yes.
If I understood correctly, your catalog is part of you have one catalog for multiple institutions, is that correct?
Yes.
And so when you were doing RDA in your department and your library, what considerations did you have in addition to just what you were doing, because you were cataloging into a catalog that X number of libraries are also cataloging into?
I just pretty much kept our colleagues at our other institutions aware that I was adding RDA records. And our RDA records cohabitated nicely with our many other records in the system. We have AACR2, we have pre-AACR2, we have non-AACR2. So they all just cohabitate nicely. It didn't really impact the work that the other institutions were doing or contributing. They were all interested in RDA and what we were doing as far as training. So they asked me a lot of questions and I helped out where I could. Even though our institutions are very similar, we retain a lot of our own unique individuality. So we pretty much do our own cataloging, we have our own collections, and whatever they contribute to the catalog just kind of cohabitates. I hope that was helpful.
Somewhat related to that, we use III as well. Is your systems librarian part just for CCSU, or is it the overall consortial systems library?
Yes, each institution has their own systems person, and so we have a systems librarian that works with our library, but also coordinates the other. It's in his job description to coordinate with the other libraries also.
Do you know, are they responsible for the load profiles, or is that something that you're aware of?
It would be nice if one person could coordinate that, but each institution has people trained in the load profiling. And if someone changes or goes in and changes a load profile, they let everyone know that we really rely on communication between all the institutions.
Do you know if all the load profiles have been updated to accept the RDA fields, even though you're suppressing them from the public view?
Yes, they should all be updated. III had a service agreement, a free service agreement that they did for us to make sure our system is, I guess, RDA compliant. However, we do a lot of, not too much, hopefully, tweaking to suppress certain fields or to make certain fields available. So yeah, it's tricky because we all have people in place at each of the institutions that kind of go in and work with the system. And we really try to stay in contact with each other on what we're all doing. Because there are many fingers in the pie, and we really, it could be a potential nightmare, but we really try to keep communication open so that everyone knows what we're all doing.
I had a question for you by way of example. We just had a new hire, and it's been a while since I had to teach somebody how to use AACR2. And teaching somebody to use AACR2 is hell. Well, no, it really is, because there are certain, like, well, you gotta look here, you gotta look here, and this is abbreviated, but not all the time, you know, all this sort of stuff. And but as we're training, I'm training him as a copy cataloger, so we inevitably bring in RDA records for books. And my experience is that it makes so much more sense because it's literally, it's WYSIWYG with a title page with describing a manifestation. You just take what's there and just do it. Whereas with AACR2, it seems like, well, sometimes you take it and sometimes add the U.S. place of publication here and all this. Have you found that it's been easier to train your copy catalogers with RDA than it was training them using AACR2?
Our copy cataloger just looks, she does many, many things. She's wonderful. When she's doing our copy cataloging, she's only looking for very specific things in the record. So she's not really fully trained in AACR2. We did have an intern, a library school intern this past year, and it was interesting to see, she hadn't worked in a library before, so she was a blank slate, so it was interesting to see how she was receptive to the new training. And she loved RDA. She found it so much easier. She had a little bit of exposure to AACR2, but her thought of it was that RDA was so much easier because it is, you take what you see, that it was an easier really transition. But just the whole concept of RDA was more acceptable to her and an easier.
Because I think it's harder for catalogers who've used AACR2 for a long time, because it's like reading a foreign language because you're translating your head between AACR2 and RDA. It's like if you could take all the AACR2 information out of your head and then just start over, it would be a little bit easier.
for any of the presenters, I guess. So, based on what Damian was speaking on about the semantic web, if there is in the near future, however long it takes us to get there, if more libraries are, working towards creating records that are more web-friendly, do you still see that there's going to be a heavy need for iOS systems, or do you think that there's going to be more of like a open resource sharing, or how will that work?
You're always going to need an inventory system, so you know what's going in and what's going out. But what you won't need is this huge, not that it's that huge, but you won't need this back-end database that basically picks apart the MARC record to get, all the keyword indexes and all that sort of stuff. What it would do, so if it was all out on the web, what you would do is that you would develop an application that would say, search these properties out on the web. And then you would get hits back from the web. Or you could say, and only search those things that we own. Things like that. So it's more, we're almost going to have to become more, we put our data out there, but there's going to be increased emphasis on programming and doing all, and trying to take advantage of the semantic web. So I don't see as big, an ILS will be important for inventory control, but that's about all I can see going forward. Maybe acquisitions too, but yeah.
I have another question for you. So how much of this is already starting to happen? And I ask this because I've been searching the web trying to find juice copies of our stores that have gone missing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding that if I put in a publisher name and a publisher number, sometimes I'm getting back WorldCat hits, and I'm also getting some library catalog item records.
OCLC came out with, sometime within the past year, with their own version of microdata, which is RDF, and so that's why you're getting those now, because they've been converting parts of their record to be semantic web friendly. I think if you've also seen on Google, let's say you put in a name of a place now, something will pop up on the right side of that Google page that's structured information. Something like, located in a certain city or a country, its population, things like that. That's structured data that's being mined from using semantic web. Wikipedia, DBpedia is probably where they're getting that information. So it's starting to get out there. And in fact, in the business world, RDF is being more widely used because some retailers like Best Buy or Walmart would be used a version of RDF called RDFA, and it's structured information, but it's driven their sales up 30%. So it's making money for people out there to use linked data.
Go ahead.
I have two very different questions. The first one is a question about the semantic web. When I've talked to some people in the computer science world, who are very much not in the library world, they've been much more skeptical about the semantic web because they see it as inefficient. Specifically people that are in artificial intelligence and that work with natural language processing, they say the way to find information is just these web crawlers that scan text that's already out there. And it takes way too much human intervention to create this much linked data.
Oh, right now it does take a lot of human intervention to do it right now. But I would argue they've been working on natural language processing for 30 or 40 years, and they're still at a very rudimentary level in understanding it. So the RDF is a way to answer that by just making small statements about stuff so it's dumped down. Now, there are other arguments made that maybe the logic of the semantic web is faulty, but I don't know the arguments well enough to be of any help.
Can I ask my second question? Is a question for anybody. Does RDA, will it change any of the rules about when to create a new record and when something is a new edition versus not a new edition?
Not say. I don't think it would change that really. I I can't think of an instance where,
I mean, aren't we mostly, we're mostly relying like on, you know, bib formats and standards for when to input a new record and when not to, or when to, which is based on an ALA document. So I don't think RDA really addresses
it's
that.
not, that's more of a, it's actually more of a cooperative cataloging agreement than anything else. So, but there's potential because RDA and for behind it are looking more closely at what in defining edition and all that and different works. So there's always the potential of teasing out and making more granular descriptions of different editions than we do right now. We tend to try and smoosh everything onto a record if we can get away with it. So. The other thing I was going to add before was just in question about ILSs. I think we are at a really interesting time where we're going to see a new generation of ILSs very soon, where a lot of the functionality is moved into the cloud, and I think there is potential there for totally revamping even acquisitions and inventory and all that. I think everyone's going to be looking at systems, more overarching systems, whether it comes from OCLC, an open source system like Huawei, OLE, or something like that. So I think we'll see change.
I have another question. And again, I'm not a cataloger, so maybe this is a naive question, but with the RDA implementation, does this mean that, so records being created as of March 2013 going forward will be an RDA. Records prior to that time, if they haven't been modified, will they not be modified? Or will that be done kind of
Well,
sporadically?
there are some vendors, trying to remember which one, I think Backstage is offering some sort of service, obviously you have to pay for it, where they'll go back and do some upgrading ACR2 records, like add in RDA data elements like the content type, the carrier type, and the media type, obviously for a fee, but they'll upgrade some of that. But we never went back when, was anybody here remember when we switched from ACR1 to ACR2? Anybody? Okay, all right. So you guys think nobody went back and upgraded ACR1 records to ACR2 in the catalog. Because that would have been a hellacious amount of work. It was already hellacious to begin with, right? Because every single access, every single heading for music changed from ACR1 to ACR2, which involved kids going through a catalog card catalog and erasing headings and typing out new headings. And this transition between ACR2 and RDA is much easier than the old transition. So, in point of fact, it's even hard to tell the difference between an ACR2 and an RDA record when they come in the catalog.
For that copyright